In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made these bangles. I'm also going to show you how I made these ones and these ones, plus a couple more. Oh, and I also have some important updates from my last video in which I made these bracelets you see here, and if you haven't seen that, just click the link on the top right of the screen. And as usual, I also have a free printable for you, and you can get that by visiting www.funcraftstodoathome.com, and I've put the link in the description below this video. Now, I just want to warn you, there's going to be a lot of talking in this video, and it's double the usual length because really it's two videos in one. The first few bracelets that you're going to see me make is me explaining how I've updated some of the techniques I used in the previous video. After I made that video, I found ways to improve on the bracelets, and so that's what you're going to see me do in the first part of the video. But if you want to jump straight to the fabric bangles, there is a timestamp in the first comment under this video. And if you're one of those people that doesn't like a lot of talking, you have the option of turning the sound down and the subtitles on. So if you watched my last video, you will know that my friend Terry in Australia sent me a bag of her handcrafted goodies. And the bracelets that I made in the last video were based on the first items that I took out of the bag, and I said I was gradually going to show you everything in the bag, and over time we'll make these things together. So what's next from the bag, and what was my inspiration for these latest bracelets? Well, it's these homemade fabric rolls which have double-sided tape on the back of them. Now this is a fantastic idea, something that I'd never thought of, I'd never heard of, and I wasn't even sure if I could do this because I'm not somebody that works in fabric a lot, although I do have quite a fabric stash out in my storage shed, which I'll take you out there in a moment, and you'll see what I had to choose from and why I was so excited about these bracelets, because yes, I've got a use for my fabrics now. So these ones obviously are Terry's, and what she's done, she's just cut strips of fabric with double-sided tape on the back, and these can be used for a number of different projects. You can use them as fabric washi tape in your art journals, your junk journals, or you can do what I'm about to do, and that is to try and replicate the bracelets that Terry made with her fabric strips. So if you're someone that's got loads of fabric that you're not sure what to do with, this video will be ideal for you. So come with me now into one of my storage sheds and I'll show you my fabric stash. It's probably nowhere near as big as the stashes that some of you will have, but this is what I've got. Yeah, there was quite a few odds and ends to choose from, and this isn't even fabric as such. I got that in a charity shop. It's actually a duvet cover. I'm sure that will come in handy for something. So these are just some fat quarters that I bought, I don't know, ages ago. So any one of these fabrics would have been ideal for this project. I used that one for one of the big wide bangles. Love that. I used that pink one, the one underneath this one. I didn't actually use this one. I think I may use that next time. So yeah, I used this one. I've forgotten the name of the company that makes this because I'm sure lots of people are probably going to ask me where I got that from. Oh, it's okay, I found it. Look, I've put it on the screen here. I will still put it on my blog, but here it is, Rose and Hubble. Oh, this one I used. I love this. That's enough of my oh, I used that one. So I'm going to start getting into the video now. But just bear in mind that before I get to the bangles that I use these fabrics on, I'm just going to go over the making of these bracelets because I've greatly improved on the techniques and materials from the previous video. And to be honest, this will be beneficial to you to know in the making of the fabric bracelets. So stick with me and see what I have to say about the improvements that I have made since the previous video. But if you really are desperate to get to the tutorial about the fabric bangles, then you can go to the first comment underneath this video, and there you will find a timestamp that will take you to that part of the tutorial. Well, if you saw my last video, you'll know that the plastic I used for the base of the bracelet came from this water bottle. But Sonia, one of my viewers, very kindly left a comment in which she said that she has done this, but she has used plastic from bleach bottles, which was a really helpful idea. And the reason why is because these bracelets made from the water container plastic really could have done with being made from a thicker plastic. And the reason why is because, unlike the bracelets that Terry made, I chose to put magnetic clasps on my bracelets just because I had some and I'd never used them and I wanted to try them out. And the clasps were quite heavy. And although I don't think the plastic would actually split, I do think that the clasps are too heavy to use with this thin water container plastic. So, with Sonia's idea in mind about the bleach bottle, I went shopping to see what other materials there may be out there that I could use that would be more robust than water container plastic. Well, that light blue one came from this. It's some kind of powder that you shake onto the carpet to get rid of odours. And then of course you've got the bleach container, which obviously is going to be thicker than a water container because it's got bleach in. So I got that. And then I started to look at drink cans. So I got this. And I also bought a can of Diet Coke, which is not something that I would usually buy, but hey ho, if it's for crafting and not drinking, it's fine. Anyway, I cleaned them all out, and so here I have 4 different kinds of material that I was going to use to try and make bases for my bracelets. And I have to say, this light blue one was my favourite one, and the bleach container was my second favourite. But there wasn't really much to choose between the two, to be honest. They're both perfect for making really strong bracelet bases. I just want to emphasise here that there's nothing wrong with using water container plastic. It was really only because I used those heavy clasps that I went looking for something stronger. Look, I'm not saying that these first bracelets that I made are no good. Far from it. I have been wearing these a lot. I'm just saying that there are stronger materials, and this is the result that I got from using those stronger materials. These second batch of bracelets that I made, which you'll see a bit of in this video, see the difference? The one on the right is the water container plastic, and the one on the left is the one that I cut from the Shake and Fresh container. So using this much thicker plastic does give you a much more robust bracelet. You can see, look, the way that flaps around. And it is because I have put these heavy magnetic clasps onto very thin plastic. So if you're planning on making a straightforward bangle, then using the water container plastic is really not a problem. But these ones that are made with the light blue thick plastic, they feel really substantial. And that plastic can easily take the weight of those clasps. And while we're on the subject of those clasps, I just want to let you know, lots of people in the comments told me that they couldn't get hold of those clasps, or they didn't know where to get hold of them. So I have put more information about where to get the clasps over on my blog, and the link is in the description below this video. And I just want to let you know that the printables that I used for these 2 bracelets, those printables were designed by 2 of my grandsons, William and Alex, who I'm trying to teach to use Adobe Photoshop. So I am going to be giving those designs away as free printables as well over on my website. There will be a link in the description underneath this video to my website where you can get those free printables and the other one that I showed you earlier on. So that's 3 free printables for you with this video. Actually, no, it's 4 free designs, because I put a bonus one up last Saturday, which I posted as a community post on YouTube. So I am going to put a link to that into my blog post for anyone that did miss that design. And before I go any further, I just want to let you know that's worthwhile going over to the blog post that's associated with this video, because over there I'm talking about where to get the clasps. Also, I'm going to talk about the cutting machine that I use, because a couple of people have asked me about that, and also a couple of people have asked me about the template that I use to cut the strips on my cutting machine. I'm also going to address the issue of, are the beads waterproof, which is something else that has come up in the comments. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. I think this is a good point to mention another comment that was made by another viewer called My Mia Arabella, and she came up with some really good ideas about using yarns and trims to wrap the bracelets with. Now, unknown to her, that was going to be the subject, or one of the subjects of this video, the follow-up video to that first one, because that was what Terry had done with some of the bracelets that she sent me. She had used wire and embroidery silk and trims to wrap around her bracelets, and I was actually saving that for the next video, which is this video. So thank you to My Mia Arabella, who also in that same comment brought up the subject of colouring the sides of the paper bead strips with Sharpie marker before you wrap them. Now, anyone that watches this channel regularly will know that I'm usually an absolute fanatic about colouring the sides of my paper bead strips, because as you can see from these two bracelets, colouring the edges of the bead strips made from the same design can be made to look completely different just by using two different coloured Sharpie markers. So these two bracelets are cut from the same A4 printable, but they look completely different because one's coloured with blue and one's coloured with green. And the bracelet on the left, I haven't coloured the edges of those strips at all. So you can see that it really does make a huge difference. And here's another one that I've edged in pink. You know, what a difference. If I hadn't put the Sharpie down the sides of those bead strips before I wrap them around the plastic base for this one, you'd get a completely different look. So when you've cut your bead strips and you're getting ready to wrap them, just bear that tip in mind to decide what kind of a look you want for your finished bracelet. So yeah, now we can finally dive into the actual tutorial, because I've already talked way too much, but I will have put a timestamp in at the beginning for people that want to jump straight to the tutorial. So probably if you're still here at this point, it's because you wanted to hear what I had to say. So if you did, thank you so much for being here. And now let's get on with the tutorial. For these new bracelets, I did use the new materials that I had collected. I didn't actually use the appetizer can in the end, but I did use the Coke can, the bleach bottle, and the light blue plastic from the shaky vacky thing. I can't remember what it's called. What was it called? I don't know. Anyway, it had that powder in. Oh yeah, Shake and Fresh. So that was what I used. And this blue plastic was fairly easy to cut. Once I established how I was going to cut it, it was okay. So basically just measure out the width that you want. I just wanted a, you know, skinny strips. I used the markings on my self-healing mat. I think they're about 1 centimetre apart, aren't they? And of course I needed some of them to be able to fit into the magnetic clasps that I was going to use on some of the bracelets. So here I am using my craft knife, but that wasn't really up to the job. You really need an industrial strength knife, you know, something like a big Stanley knife. You definitely the craft, you know, knives that are designed for cutting paper. No, you need something a lot stronger. I mean, I managed. I did cut the plastic, but it was much easier once my husband appeared and handed me a proper knife. Thank you. Which is really kind of him. You can see it there to the right. Yeah, that one. And you'll see I've moved on to the bleach container plastic now, and that was really easy to cut with that big knife. The next thing I cut was the Coke can. The aluminium, or aluminum as you probably say in America. Oh sorry, not the Coke can, this was the appetizer can, but it's the same stuff. And I ended up not actually using that, I used the Coke can aluminium. So I managed to cut that with scissors. One thing I should say from a safety point of view, you definitely need to wear safety gloves if you do this. Because I definitely wasn't expecting to get a shard of metal in my finger, but I did. As I ran my finger along where I'd folded to get a nice sharp crease, I ran my finger down here and right at that moment I felt a stab and I ended up with this in my finger. See that there? So you definitely need to wear safety gloves. And I did use a bone folder to help get a sharp crease. This did turn out to be a fairly good bracelet band, but I think only because I had folded it over and made it stronger. Drinks can material on its own is not strong enough, it's far too flimsy. So if you are going to use Coke can or whatever, you have to be prepared to fold it over like this to make it stronger. And the other thing was, I found that the Coke can band didn't keep its shape as well as the heavy plastic. I'm not saying that I would never make another bracelet using drinks cans, but on balance I definitely preferred the heavier plastic to use as my bracelet bases. The bracelet on the left here was the one that I ended up making with the Coke can band. And the other thing is, this is a bit time consuming compared to cutting strips from the plastic. I could probably have cut 20 bands from the bleach container plastic in the time it took me to make one of these. You can see how much stronger this is when it's folded. There's quite a bit of spring in that. Nothing like when it's a single layer. Whoops, gloves off again. Okay. So these are all the bases that I ended up with after my cutting session. I used all of these apart from the appetizer one. And to be honest, the reason I bought the appetizer can was because it was smaller and I just thought they'd probably be good for making children's bracelets, but I decided against that. And in any case, you can make child-sized bracelets from any of the other plastics because you can just obviously cut them to the length that, that suits the wrist of the child. I think you can see here that the single strip of the aluminium is just too flimsy, unless of course you fold it like this. So with your bracelet bases cut, it's now time to start cutting your strips. You can either do this by hand, you can use my plastic bead template that I showed you in the last video if you want to order one of those, or you can do what I'm doing here and use an electronic cutter, which I talk more about over on my blog for those of you that have asked questions about the electronic cutter. It's much faster. You end up with these lovely cut strips. You also have the skeleton, which you see me cutting out here. This is not waste. You can put these strips to one side and use them as spacer beads in future projects. So that was one of the free printables that I'm giving away this time. That was one of those, and this is another one of the free printables. As I said, both of these ones were designed by two of my grandsons. So the strips that I have in my hand are the ones that I used to make the bracelet I also have in my hand, and I didn't colour the edges of those bead strips. But for the next one I am going to colour the edges so that you can see what the effect of that is, and it really does make a massive difference. This can seem as if it's a little bit tedious, but to be honest, once you get into the swing of doing this, you can just run through them really fast. So now it's time to actually start putting the bracelets together. And the first ones I'm going to do are similar to the last ones that I did, but I've changed the technique slightly. So that's why I'm showing you these again, because the technique that I am using here is slightly better. I am going to get to the more exotic looking new bangles that I've done. I am going to get to them next, so don't worry, you are going to see how to make those. I just wanted you to see the improvements that I've made to the technique since I made the last video, so it is worth watching this because the bracelets are much better. You don't have to put the guidelines on the bracelets like you see me doing here, but I find that they're helpful. I like to find the centre of the bracelet so that I know where to put the first strip. And one of the things that I did differently with these bracelets is the double-sided sticky tape that I used. Instead of putting it on the inside of the bracelet, I put it on the outside. Now that made a huge difference. It was much easier to get on there. So another thing that I did differently, instead of putting double-sided tape on the other end, you know, the end that needs to be stuck down when you finish winding, instead of putting double-sided tape on there like I did in the last video, I used glue stick, which is exactly what I do with all my other paper beads, so I've no idea what possessed me to use double-sided tape in the other video. And by the way, apologies for loss of focus here, it does come back in a minute, sorry about that. Using glue stick is so much easier. I don't like using wet glue. I know lots of people use wet glue to stick the end down, but I'm not a fan of wet glue. I prefer the glue stick because it sticks instantly and you don't have to kind of sit there and hold it for a few seconds. So yeah, that was another major thing that I did differently, and that saves so much time than trying to put double-sided tape on every strip. But I'm absolutely certain that most people out there would have figured that one out for themselves. You know, it's just a crazy waste of time to use double-sided tape. And if you do decide to have a go at this, when you're wrapping the strips around the band, you will get into your own rhythm. You will find your own way of doing this. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It will just be your way. This is how I do it, but you may well do it in a different way. And then of course, when you get to almost to the end, you don't really want that strip to be coming over onto the front and finishing halfway up the front of the bead. It doesn't look very good, so snip it off and put your dab of glue stick on there and then just fold it over. It's so much simpler this way. And there's the first one done. And then you're just going to repeat this all the way round up to the black lines that you've done at either end where the clasps are going to go on. And just make sure that you butt each strip up very close to the one before it. You don't want any gaps in between. Just get them as close as you can. And continue to wrap. And keep it nice and tight. When you get to the end, and you may have gaps left at either end that are not big enough to put a full strip there, You just need to cut a couple of the remaining strips down. You just kind of cut a strip off and fit it in there. And this is why I like to start winding from the middle, because you roughly get, you know, in theory you should get the same size gaps left on either end. I mean, it doesn't always work out that way, but you can see I've cut a strip down, and I'm going to cut it down even more in a moment. See that? To make it fit there. You should have a couple of strips left over, and you can just cut them down like that. Okay, it's easy. And then once you've done that, once you've got right to the end where the clasp is going to go on, this is where I made another big change to what I did in the last video, because those magnetic clasps that I use on the ends, they've actually got quite a wide hole in them, quite a wide aperture. So in the last video I just pushed the ends of the plastic in. Well, anyone that's seen it will see what a disaster I had with the super glue. I'm happy to say that I didn't have anything like that happen this time. But what I did do with this bracelet is I built up the ends so that the ends fitted into the hole of the clasps a lot better. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just building up the end so that it will have a tighter fit into the clasp. So at this point it's just a question of building up layers until you're happy with the fit on the clasp, and then gluing the clasps on. And I know I said I wasn't going to use super glue anymore, and I did. Loads of people recommended E6000, and I had completely forgotten. I had bought some E6000 from another project where people, I think particularly people in America, seem to really love E6000, and I had bought some from Amazon a long time ago, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. Well, I found it in my stash of various glues and sealers, and I thought, oh brilliant, I can use this E6000, but I couldn't because it had gone solid. I don't know why. I don't think there's any holes in the tube or anything, but it had gone absolutely solid. So I don't know if you... So it was back to the dreaded super glue, but this time I was much more mindful of how dangerous it can be, and so you can see here how I used it. Somebody suggested that I use a toothpick, so I did start to use a toothpick, but then I ended up just dipping the end straight into the glue. And it all worked out absolutely fine this time. There was no accidents. I got my clasp stuck on there, and it was so much better with those ends built up to fit in the clasps. And so there it is, the clasp, one of the clasps is on, and I then put the other one on and then hung it up to dry, and it was all fine. And that's what I did with the other couple of bracelets that I made this time that I used clasps with. I then went on to use this same A4 printable design, and this time I used a green Sharpie, and it gave it a completely different look. But I'm not going to go through the whole process because you've just seen me do that one, and so I just followed that exact same process with the next one. Okay, and this is what it ended up looking like with the green edging, and everything that I did differently here made it a great improvement on the original bracelets that I made in the last video. I then used my own design, my own free printable design, which, as I said, you can get by going over to my website, and again I will say the link is in the description underneath this video. So if you want to use this design, you can go over there and get that along with 3 other free designs. And I did this exactly the same way. I used my electronic cutter to cut my strips, and I also used my own cut file to get the strips in the size that I want. But this time I used the bleach container plastic, and it was fine. It worked out really well. I'm quite happy with that. And once again, I put the double-sided tape on the outside of the plastic strip rather than the inside, because I found that to be much easier. I coloured the edges of the paper bead strips, and then I made the bracelet as I made the other one. And this is what yours is going to look like too if you use my free printable and you use pink on the edges. But obviously if you want to use a different colour, you're going to get a different look. So these are all the ones that I made using the thicker plastic and the improved techniques. And these are the ones that I did with clasps. And if anyone's in any doubt as to whether the thicker plastic is better or not, just look at this. The one on the left is the water container plastic, and the one in my right hand is made with the thicker plastic. There's just absolutely no contest. That thicker plastic is definitely the way to go. So thank you, Sonia, if you're watching. I really appreciate that tip. It's brilliant. It's made such a difference. I am coming to the fabric bangles, I promise you, but I just need to show you quickly how I made these bracelets in the more masculine colours and the larger size. I want to show you these because these are the first bracelets where I did some trim, where I wrapped some trim around them in between the beads. So I'll just quickly show you them, and I think I have one other one in which I used a clasp, and that's actually using the fabric, so that's good. Then I'm going to move on to these bangles in which I don't use clasps at all. So anyone that can't get hold of them is going to be really happy because you can make these beautiful bracelets and not worry about that, okay? So for these bracelets I used some black and green card. I cut my strips and then I used exactly the same technique that I've used on the other bracelets. And for one of them I used the band of aluminium that I cut from the Coke can. So for the first one of these bracelets, I used the wider black strips alternated with the skinny green ones, and then on the second bracelet I swapped over, so I used the wider green strips and then the skinnier black strips alternated, and you'll see that I got 2 completely different looks from that. So that's what the first one ended up looking like. And I ended up sealing this one with Mod Podge dishwasher safe. So I'll go into more detail about the various Mod Podge sealers over on my blog, and as I said, the link to that is in the description beneath the video. And it does give it a lovely sheen, which is going to be waterproof. But as I said, there's more about that subject over on my blog. And I'm just using this bracelet to show you what you can do if you want to wrap various materials in between your beads. For this I am using some gold metallic thread, very fine thread. And I'm just sticking it down at the end where the double-sided tape is. And I put plenty round there to make sure it's not going to come off, and also to make sure that when the clasp goes on, you've got some of the gold thread showing at the end there. It's very straightforward. All you need to do is wrap several times in between the beads, and then you can cross the thread over either on the front or the back of the bracelet. Both methods look good. On one bracelet I wrapped at the back, and on the next bracelet I wrapped at the front, so that you can see the different effects of both. And this is what it looks like when it's done. And the band of aluminium that I cut from the Coke can worked really well. But I'm not sure that I would use Coke can again, because the bracelet doesn't keep the shape as well as the thicker plastics do. So on to the next one now, and I used the band that I cut from the bleach container, and as I said, this time I alternated these strips so that I used the wider green strips and the skinny black strips, just to get a different look. So that's what this arrangement looks like, and when I did the wrapping of the gold thread, I brought the thread across the front of the beads instead of the back, and this is what that looks like when it's done. So that's those ones finished, and I'm now going to move on to the first fabric covered bracelet, and I'm going to show you how to cut those strips of fabric and how to put them onto your bracelet band. This is what some of my rolls of fabric look like, and I was a bit nervous about doing this because I'd never done it before and I wasn't really sure if I could do what Terry had done. I was actually convinced that the edges of the fabric would fray and it would be really messy, but when I actually did it, the edges didn't fray that much, and I found that any stray threads that I did have snipped off really easily, so my fears were completely unfounded, and I love these rolls, and I'll definitely be making lots more of these. This was my very first attempt at making one of these rolls, and obviously you need to put the double-sided sticky tape on the back of the fabric. It was quite difficult to tell with this one. The double-sided tape that I have did stick really well, but just to make absolutely certain, I did put some pressure on there to make sure that it was stuck really firmly. So my next challenge was being able to cut this strip out really accurately. Now, cutting straight is probably not one of my biggest talents, so I know this looks really wasteful, but I decided that I was just going to rough cut the strip out so that I didn't have all that fabric hanging off on the right side when I was trying to cut. So I did it this way, and that strip, that extra strip on the side that looks as if I'm wasting loads, I will actually use that. I have put that back in my fabric stash, so it's not gone to waste. And in the end, I did find it quite easy to cut right next to the edge of the tape. It's more difficult when you're filming because I'm not holding it in the position that I would naturally hold it in. So once I was off camera and I had the fabric closer to me, I found it much easier and much quicker to cut these strips. So it's not actually as clumsy as it looks here. It is simply because of the position that I am in to keep it underneath the camera. And then once I'd got the strip cut, I used a piece of paper straw to wrap the fabric around to turn it into a roll, and then you just need a small elastic band to secure it. I actually use zoom bands to secure mine. They're perfect for that. And when I made the rest of the fabric rolls that I used in this video, I ended up using my really big cutting mat, and I put it down on the floor, and I did find a way to speed the process up. I just, ran my fingers along behind the roll, and it ended up being a much quicker process. The plastic I used to create the band for my first fabric bracelet came from this dried herb container, which I think came from Costco. It was easy to cut down. I just used a big Stanley knife that Gary gave me. It was really easy to cut through. I actually used a combination of the Stanley knife and scissors to finish off, but it was really easy to cut out the band that I wanted. And then I just drew some lines so that I could even up the edges, and I wanted a band that was a couple of inches wide. After I sized it to the widest part of my hand, where it's got to go over to get onto my wrist, I put a couple of strips of double-sided tape to seal it into a circle. And now for the fun part, where we're actually going to wrap the bracelet with the fabric. I found it easier to cut short lengths of it, because when you add the next length on, you do it on the back of the bracelet and you don't even notice the join, and it's just much easier to wrap with shorter length. And when you finish one length, just cut another one, take the backing off, and either stick it onto the inside of the bracelet, or if you want to do it on the front, just put it right on the very edge at the front. And just carry on this process until you have covered the entire bracelet. I'll just let you watch a bit more of this in real time so you can see how I actually did it and the struggles that I had and what you can expect if you try this. The double-sided tape does stick to your fingers a bit, which does make it a little bit of a struggle, but you know, that's to be expected. If you get any pleating or loose parts, you just address that when you move the fabric over slightly to move the wrap on. As you bring it back up and over that edge, it will take care of any loose fabric that may be there from the bend, if that makes sense. You'll find your own way with this. I had never done this before, so this is literally the first time that I am wrapping fabric around a plastic bangle, and I did okay. It was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So at least now that you're watching this in real time, you can see exactly how the process went and how long it took. It doesn't take long. And the results are absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, see, you get bits of the fabric stuck to your fingers, but you can't be off that because you're using sticky tape, and it's going to be a bit like that. But see, that looks good. I was happy with that. Now, obviously that isn't finished. That doesn't look like the finished bangle that I showed you in the pictures. But I will show you at the end how I actually decorated all of these bangles. So I'm now going to move on to the next bangle that I made, which is from something that I haven't mentioned yet. And that is these cable ties. This was another tip from Terry. One of the bracelets that she sent was made from a cable tie. So you just need to measure it over the widest part of your hand. And of course you need to cut that chunky end off first, you know, the bit that you slide the end of the cable tie into. You just need to get rid of that because you don't need that for this. You just need the flat plastic to form the band. And this is the one that Terry sent me, so I'm just using hers as a gauge to get mine roughly the same size, because hers fit over my wrist perfectly. And then I used a hot glue gun to fix the ends. And it takes a few seconds to cool off, and then you just need to pull off any excess glue that is squeezed out. And I made myself a stack of them because I knew that I'd got several bangles that I wanted to make. And this is a really inexpensive way of making bangles because I think I got just over 250 of these in a pack at Lidl, and I think they only cost about £2. And because this bangle is so much skinnier than the other one that I did, I decided to cut my fabric strips in half. And it was much easier to wind around that narrow band. And it was exactly the same process as before. Only I did find this a little bit easier because it is narrower. So just wrap all the way round, just like we did with the big one. And there is that one done. I did just have to snip a few loose threads off, but not many at all. Because of course the double-sided sticky tape does discourage fraying at the edges. And then I did a few more with the other rolls of fabric that I had made. And all that was left now was for me to decorate these with the various threads and wire that I had. I only used wire on one of them, this one on the right, and that's a lot easier to do than it looks. This is 24 gauge tarnish resistant copper wire that I got from Amazon because I wasn't able to get this locally, and this is how I wrapped it around the bangle. You just need to do this around the entire bangle. It did feel a bit clumsy at first until I got used to working with that long length of wire, but once you get into the swing of this it is really easy. I found it a lot easier than I thought it was going to be when I first saw what Terry had done and how effective it looks on her bracelet. I was a bit unsure of how easy it would be to do this, but there was no problem. And as this was my first attempt at ever doing this, I was really pleased with the result. There were a couple of threads there that I needed to snip off, but that, that's no problem. That was fabric, not wire. So thanks for that, Terry. I enjoyed learning that, and I will be definitely using that technique again. To decorate the next one, I used this turquoise ribbon, this really skinny ribbon, and I got this from Hobbycraft in the UK. I used exactly the same technique that I used to wrap the wire, only obviously this was much easier because it wasn't stiff, and pulling it through, when I wrapped over and over to pull it through, was a lot easier. I didn't do anything particularly fancy with this one, I just wrapped it on the diagonal all the way round. I did exactly the same thing with this stiff gold braid, which I also got from Hobbycraft in the UK. I just wrapped it around and around on the diagonal, the same as I did with the pink bracelet, and that looks very effective. I love the colours on that one. So that's how I did those three, all done on bands made with cable ties. I made this turquoise bracelet from fabric as well, but I chose to put a clasp, a magnetic clasp on this one instead of making it a bangle. And the metallic gold thread that I wrapped around there was wrapped in exactly the same way that I wrapped the wire around that first one. And I got that gold thread on Amazon. So that turquoise one was made with exactly the same technique that I've already showed you. I made the fabric roll from that turquoise fabric and just used it in the same way that I used the other fabric rolls. So now I just need to show you how I decorated these two jeweled bangles. I got this strip of jewels also from Hobbycraft in the UK. You can buy it by the meter. And I didn't want to stick it onto the fabric, but you can do if you want to. You could stick it on there. I just didn't want to. I used this thin metallic thread to bind the jewels onto the bracelet. I just wrapped round in between each one about 3 times and then moved on to the next one and just carried on all the way around the bracelet and then just stuck the ends in. I think I sewed the ends in on these ones. I actually got a needle and sewed the ends into the fabric on the inside of the bracelet. And I think this one and the one that's made in the same fabric but wider, they are my two favourite bracelets of all of the ones that I have made. And that's what that one looks like finished. It's really quite exotic and has a more luxurious feel to it. And then I used exactly the same technique to put 2 strips of the jewels, one at the top and one at the bottom, on the wider fabric bangle. And I wrapped the metallic thread across the whole width of the bracelet to encompass both the strips of jewels. And because they were likely to slide up and down those threads, I took 2 black loom bands. So I have loads of loom bands because my grandchildren love to use them. I took 2 black loom bands and I stretched them around the bangle in line with the strips of jewels to stop them from sliding up and down the bangle. And it actually looks pretty good. The bands don't look out of place. And so yeah, they're my 2 favourites from out of the whole lot that I've made. Now lastly, I just want to talk to you about putting glue, or in this case Mod Podge, over the fabric bangles. So this is my least favourite bangle. I can't remember what the base of this was, but I know it didn't work very well. I can't remember now which plastic. I think it was plastic from the water container that I used for this. I wasn't keen on the shape of it, and then when I wrapped it with the silver thread, I wasn't really that thrilled with the way it looked. So I took that silver thread off so that I just got the fabric bangle, and I painted it with Mod Podge matte sealer to see what would happen. I did a test piece first and it seemed to be brilliant, fine. It just kind of made the fabric stiffer. And so then I went ahead and I did the whole bracelet. And the reason that I even thought about doing this was because another one of my viewers called Stephanie asked the question in the comments if you could use watered down PVA on fabric. And I was sure that you could because I have used glue on fabric journals, fabric covered journals before. But anyway, I decided that I was going to give it a go. And so thanks for that tip, Stephanie, because this really did work, and I went on to make the bracelets that I'm going to show you next. I took this one that I wanted to wrap with some lovely pale green ribbon. So I put a coat of matte Mod Podge on there first, let it dry, then I put some more on there, and wrapped the ribbon around, and then I put another coat of matte Mod Podge on top of the ribbon, and I have to say it worked really well. I did the same thing with the pink fabric bracelet, but this time I just sort of randomly wrapped the silver thread, the silver metallic thread, around. Then I left them to dry for 24 hours and the results were pretty good. I was quite pleased with them. I had been a bit worried that I might have splodged a bit too much glue on there, but you can't even see that there is glue on there. And you can still feel the fabric, so yeah, they turned out really well. Wow, that was a long video. I don't think I've made one that long before. Well, thanks to everyone who's got to the end of it. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you understand why it was so long. And don't forget, there's much more information to back up this video over on my blog, www.funcraftstodoathome.com. And one of the things that I talk about over there are the magnetic clasps that many of you have asked me where you can get them. So I have more information about those clasps over there. And in that blog post I'm going into more detail about things such as how to waterproof your beads. I'm going to talk about the electronic cutting machine that I use. I'm also talking about the cut file that I designed to use with my electronic cutter. What else am I going to talk about? Oh yeah, I'm going to talk about my Amazon shops, because I have had someone moaning about my Amazon shops and telling me how I can make more money if I do this or if I do that. So I am addressing that issue over there, which is quite an interesting one. And please don't forget all 4 free printables that are waiting for you over on my blog. All you got to do is click the links to them and it will take you to my Google Drive, where I store all my free designs, because I can't store them on my website because it would slow it down too much. So I think that just about wraps up this very long video. Thank you everyone that has watched to this far. I really appreciate that. I will be back again soon with another video and more goodies from Terry's bag, and I will be back with more free designs. And meanwhile, enjoy your crafting, and I will see you again soon. Bye!